Good evening from Israel, and thank you all for joining this call. As you all know, the issue of tensions between China and the United States and the triangle of US, China, Israel have been a major issue before the coronavirus crisis, but it seems to have intensified since this crisis broke out. Uh, there's a lot of analytical work and writing about the foundations of the tensions between the US and China, um, addressing questions like why does the United States see China as a rival? What exactly does China want, and so on? And I think these major questions are not fully resolved. However, we do see the tension coming to bear in an economic trade competition between these two giants. There is a competition also on technological dominance, and there is a major concern in the West, I would say also in Israel, about Chinese theft of intellectual property. I have had the opportunity to discuss this with people in both the US and Israeli intelligence communities, and they all claim that this is a real concern that should not be underestimated. And we see this expressing itself in debates over 5G, artificial intelligence, and so on. What does China want? In my view, my take on it is that China does not really seek global dominance. It doesn't want to be number one. It doesn't want to bear responsibility for international crisis. It does want an equal footing or equal standing in the international community like the United States. It does seek economic prowess and technological dominance, and it does seek dominance in its own neighborhood in Central and Eastern Asia. The tensions between the United States and China have intensified since the outbreak of this crisis. We see President Trump referring to the Chinese virus and the Chinese retorting by some officials, blaming the United States for launching biological warfare. But the real policy issue for the day after is who will emerge stronger, more dominant in the international community following this crisis. And there are quite a few analysts and observers who believe that China might emerge stronger because notwithstanding the fact that the virus broke out in China, China managed to contain it, but not only that, it is now reaching out to other countries and offering help, support, knowledge. We see them reaching out to Italy, some countries in the Middle East and elsewhere. It is a rather paradox that China is now employing what one might term soft power, which is not very characteristic for China. I would also note that in the United States, the issue of China, regarding China as a rival, is a bipartisan issue. It is broadly shared. It's not only an issue of one party believing that. And we note now that there is a public debate in the United States. Some people saying the United States is over-dependent on China in terms of pharmaceuticals and should develop independence. So all of these tensions are likely to come to the fore on the day after this crisis, and they will definitely have an impact on Israel caught between these two giants. So where is Israel in all of this? As we know, in the recent years, Israel found itself increasingly forced to maneuver between the US and China. First, China expressed and exhibited increasing interest in Israel, in what Israel has to offer, in Israeli innovation, in Israeli technological capabilities. Israel is certainly on the Chinese map of One Belt, One Road, and we've seen China increasingly active in Israel, doing infrastructure projects like the Haifa port, the Ashdod port, railroad to Eilat, light rail in Tel Aviv, buying some companies like the major dairy company in Israel, chemical companies, and so on. And the interaction between Israel and China has grown significantly. But at the same time, we saw a U.S. pushback in the year and a half, in the last year and a half or 2 years. And as I've been told by people in our government, in the last year and a half or 2 years, Israel's relations with China become the #1 talking point in official meetings with the United States. Israel has to take several considerations in this regard. On the one hand, China is an important international actor. It is a rising global actor. It has become the biggest economy in the world in terms of purchasing power parity, PPP. It is the greatest manufacturer in the world. It can offer finance. It can offer the implementation, effective implementation of infrastructure projects, which Israel very much needs, and it is not plagued by classical anti-Semitism or pressures of BDS. I would add that there's also historical affinity between these two ancient civilizations, the Jewish and Chinese civilizations. I was one of those who a few years ago thought that this affinity might offer a bridge between the US and China, but now, given the fact that they have so much distance from each other, I think it is not the case right now. On the other hand, as we all know, the United States is Israel's closest strategic ally. It has no substitute. There's no substitute for Israel, for the United States as far as Israel is concerned. And Israel is dependent on the United States in many fields, including in the military field, in military supply of military weapon systems. And the United States and the close relations between the US and Israel definitely complement Israel's strategic deterrence. To that, I would add the fact that both in terms of values and interests, Israel is much, much closer to the United States than with China. We do not share the same value system with China, unlike the US. Let me just mention in passing that the way China treats its Muslim minority is one of those examples of a value system that we do not share. And I would just mention that this divides the Muslim world in its attitude towards China, but for lack of time, I will not delve into this. But also in geopolitical terms, the fact is that China has a very bad record, a totally negative record in terms of its voting in the UN on issues important to Israel. And China is closely related and cooperates with some of our worst enemies, including Iran, also in military terms. Under US pressure, in November 2019, the Israeli government decided to adopt and develop a new oversight mechanism, which will basically introduce into the decision-making process in Israel over foreign investments and involvement in projects in Israel, also the consideration of national security, not only trade and economic consideration. This is an initial step. It's a step in the right direction. However, it's still a weak mechanism without enforcement capabilities, and it doesn't cover the high-tech sector. It was decided by the Israeli government that this will be reviewed every 6 months, and I assume that when it is next reviewed, it will be further enhanced and developed. These dilemmas will, in my view, come to the fore after the corona crisis, and the dilemma for Israel will probably intensify, not only for Israel, but for Europe and others. It is likely that given the economic crisis that all of us are experiencing today, create a lot of dilemmas for both Israel and others as well, like Europe, European actors and so on. It is likely that China in the day after will offer investments, it will offer deals, supportive hand, it will offer to play a major role in infrastructure projects as countries struggle to recover from this crisis and to repair their economies and look forward after this huge crisis. China will probably be there in order to extend its hand, and this will intensify the dilemmas for Israel and some other actors. And I believe also geopolitically, I'm not sure how China, if and in what way China might use its advantage in dealing with the actors like Iran or others. We'll just have to wait to see. And obviously, I don't know what administration we're going to see in the United States following the elections, but as I said, it's a bipartisan issue. And obviously, there will be a US pushback in the day after. To conclude, I would say that Israel has to start thinking about the day after in the context of its relations with the United States and China today. Not wait until after this crisis, but start thinking about it today. And following up on some of Shalom's recommendations in his paper, I would say that it is time Israel strengthen its decision-making capabilities with more expertise on China, with a designated Chinese bureau in the Prime Minister's office. And it is time Israel entered a deep dialogue with the United States in order to better clarify what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in Israel's dealing with China, because not everything has been clear in the US positions on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And now we'll hear from Shalom about his summary of the report and hopefully recommendations of how Israel should handle this sensitive time in its relations between the US and China. Shalom, please.
Hello, all of you. I don't know how many people are here. I see only 3. I hope there are a few more. I'm going to sharpen some of the points which Mike just made. I want to explain why I wrote my paper, what its main purpose is. It has a double purpose. First, it wants to show the historic background of the confrontation, and second, it wants to make the case for Israel's need to have relations with China. Presenting the confrontation between the two giants historically and objectively has become very, very difficult. The blame game between the two countries is heating up. There is a major wave of xenophobia, of hate of Chinese in the Western populations, including in some parts of Israel. And the problem is that, let's speak now of the Jewish world and of Israel. So few people in Israel and the Jewish world understand the background and how it came to the present situation. If they would know it better, maybe they could, Mike alluded to this as something that is not realistic, but maybe Jewish leaders in America, Israel could play a certain role in moderating the tensions and in build bridges. You know, I put it out as a hope. We don't know. A lot will depend, of course, in the end, who in the world will win this fight, if anybody will win it. It's going to be a fight not for trade, but for technology supremacy. This is going to be the core of the confrontation. Who is going to control or to run the advances of science and technology? The country that will control the advances of science and technology is going to be the country that will control a lot of the future of the world. I tried to put together the assets and liabilities of both. What the outcome will be, nobody can say now, but let me just quote to you a comment which a friend made, Professor Steve Popper, I don't know whether he's here, from RAND, a very sharp point. He said, nobody can beat America except America itself, and they are doing very well at that. Now, making the case for Israel. Israel faces a dilemma which, in my view, it has never had before, never in that form. Our greatest friend and our indispensable ally, America, demands that we treat the second superpower almost as an enemy. Now, our links with the United States, with the US politics, with the US economy, with US military, with Wall Street and Silicon Valley, which are the backbone for our high-tech sector, with American Judaism, are indispensable. They are existential, they are indispensable. Our links with China are critical, growing, important, but it's not the same. They are not at the same level, and that is the problem. However, China, in spite of what Mike alluded, China has never been a real enemy of Israel. It was not an enemy in the past. We have 1,000 years of easy relations. China is one of the few countries with India that has never known any anti-Semitism, and this is rare, and we cannot ignore this. Let me remind you that Shanghai saved 20,000 European Jews from death at the time when the US State Department, supported by President Roosevelt, had closed America's doors to European Jews who were fleeing. Some of us don't forget that. Today, China wants to be a friend of everybody in the Middle East, but responsible for nobody. Now, China's links with Iran, which Mike mentions, are very deep. They are very problematic for us, very problematic. But these links have not been created against us. They are not against us. The links, the support of China for Iran is meant to be against the United States. And we, Israel, are collateral damage of the tension between these two giants. Why do we want links with China? There are a number of reasons. Let me mention three. Mike mentioned trade. I don't need to say more. China is the second most important trade partner for Israel. If things go well, it could grow more, in spite of the fact that Israel is severely hampered by agreements it has with the United States. We cannot sell any military technology. We can also not sell dual-use technology. And the definition of this, what the dual-use technology is largely in American hands. So in spite of this, the second largest part of our exports go to China. Second, and in my view, much more important than trade, is China's contribution to Israel's infrastructure. If you read OECD reports, my old house, the OECD, Israel is the most efficient of all modern OECD countries when it comes to infrastructure. Our roads, our railways, our ports are outdated. Our economy suffers. Our economic growth will not continue at a high level if we cannot relatively fast reform our infrastructure. And we have only one country that is really efficient in helping us in this, and this is China. This is China, and China have done a few things. which are very important, that other countries did not do. Let me quickly, you know, the anecdote of Haifa, which America was very unhappy about, that we gave the contract to China when Israel announced its tender to build the second port in Haifa. The Manufacturer Association sent a delegation to the United States. We wanted America to build this. We wanted Hezbollah, who have threatened to destroy Haifa and its port, to sink 3 times before they attacked an American asset. No American company was interested. No one wanted to come, and I don't blame them. China was ready to come, so we took them. And then we got into troubles because of this. What choice do we have? We didn't have much choice on this. Number 3, and that is a delicate point. China is entering the Middle East in major ways. At this moment, politically, militarily, economically, I think in 10 years, you come back and you will see China present in military and naval bases in the Middle East. If the United States continues to withdraw from the Middle East, and that was the intention of Obama, it seems to be the intention of Trump, China, who needs the Middle East existentially, half of China's oil comes from the Middle East. China has done whatever it could to diversify its sources, but the Middle East supplies China with half of the oil China needs. And I don't see China leaving the control of the Middle East to the Russian army or to the Turkish army or to whatever else. I think China will be pulled into the Middle East. And we are going to have a big neighbor, like we have now Russia as a neighbor. We are going to have a big neighbor, China, and we don't need to have this country considering us as an enemy because we treated them as an enemy. That is a major concern which should worry us in many ways. The opposition of the United States to China-Israel links is much older than Mike indicated. It started almost with Israel's existence. It started in 1951 when the United States Secretary of State John Foster Dulles threatened Israel with cutting all food aid if we did not stop seeking diplomatic links with China. There was no question of economic links or military links. We just wanted contacts with China, and the US said, no, you can't do that. If you do that, you won't get any food. Okay, during more than 70 years, the US was watching us, sometimes happy, sometimes unhappy. Today, we are in a situation where rumors say that the US will ask more from us than we have given so far. Rumors say, and I don't know whether they are true or not, but it stands to reason that the US will ask us not to use China in the future for infrastructure work, which would damage us, and stop university cooperation. That would be very grave. The reasons we are given are variable, not always convincing. They are spying, we shouldn't depend too much on China, etc. Now, I'm afraid, and I do more than speculating, there is the true reason which is not openly said. The US wants a payback from us. The US has done more for us, for Israel, than any country has ever done. Much more, and they say it is fair that you do a little bit more for us than any other country will do. I can understand them, and it is now just because the US pressure on most of its allies is not working. If you follow country by country, how US allies react to the pressure of the United States to cut, not to have links with Huawei, you can see one after the other, they say no. When President Trump slammed his phone down to Prime Minister Johnson, because Johnson rejected the US demands to have no investment from Huawei, some penny fell, to use an old English. Such a thing has not happened in the relationship between two strong allies in 80 years. So just because we are the last ones who will not say no to the United States. The United States would like us to appear as the most loyal ally, the most faithful friend in face of the whole world. And we should be concerned about this, because if the US really gets isolated on this, we will be isolated with them. It's a tragic paradox. The US pressure on us to limit links with China does not damage China, it damages Israel. China without Israel, without any links, would do fine. It wouldn't even, if Israel would disappear from the Chinese, from Chinese links, it would not even disappear macroeconomically in China. If China will disappear from Israel's, from Israeli links, we would suffer. It would be visible. Today, Israel,
Shalom, if you could, concluding remark, if you could, please.
Okay. The concluding remark, we understand US concerns. We had our own bad experiences. We don't idealize China. We will negotiate with them. As Mike said, we hope that they will not, that they will understand that they should not punish us more than they can punish China. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shalom. We now have three guests who we will ask to speak very briefly, maybe a couple minutes each, and then we will open up the floor for comments or questions from the audience. We have a nice crowd with us today. I see there are a few people who are on their phones and not on their computers. So one technical comment, if you are on your phone and you wish to mute or unmute, you press *6 or kochavit 6. If you would like to raise your hand and you're on your phone, then you press *9 kochavit 9. For everyone else, you can do this through the interface on the computer. So our first guest that we would like to offer comments is Carice Witt, who is the Executive Director of Signal, the Sino-Israel Global Network in Academic Leadership, and she also the Deputy Director for Middle East Studies at Renmin University in Beijing. Carice, would you like to offer some comments?
Thank you very much. And thanks to JPPI for organizing this. I'd like to focus on what Signal considers to be the most effective approach to China in general, but especially considering US concerns after the coronavirus. Given the nature of the PRC, Israel, and in fact all countries, need a comprehensive, coordinated approach to China. I began discussing this in 2015 with people in and recently out of government, and no one disagreed, but everyone said that it's not possible because Israel doesn't work that way. My reply was that Israel can manage without a comprehensive, coordinated approach with everyone else, but not with China because of China's system. Long-term planning, powerful top-down control, and able to direct enormous human financial resources in whatever way the leadership believes is best for the country. If we don't formulate an all-government approach that includes the cooperation of key areas of the private sector, we'll lose the game, meaning China will end up with long-lasting benefits and we'll end up with short-term gains, but long-term losses. Over the past few years, we've continued to recommend this all-government coordinated approach that would include knowing China's needs as well as its fears and weaknesses, and there are many. We suggest building and aggregating answers of all kinds to those needs, taking into consideration the fears and weaknesses. This approach also requires knowing what we want from China, prioritizing that list. For example, perhaps we want China to prevent all direct flights between DPRK and Iran, since those flights require access to China's airspace. With Israel's list of what it wants in one hand and the many things it can provide China on the other, we could more effectively hold a Chinese-style negotiation to our benefit. By the way, the need for an all-government coordinated approach was part of the recent CNAS report commissioned by the US Congress on developing a China-related strategy, and it was central to a report by King's College in the UK. Since 2018, with the new reality of US-China relations, it's become imperative to include US concerns in any Israeli plan regarding China. From my perspective, Made in China 2025 symbolizes many of the key issues that China has that there is between China and the US. Huawei and its 5G solution is just one of the components of that problem, but it also touches on nanotechnology, robotics, cyber, etc. For Signal, the fallout for Made in China 2025 was the turning point when we had to start focusing on what the US-China relationship meant to the relations between Israel and China. We wanted to get a clearer picture of the US perspective. So in February, I was in DC with Dale Aloof, Signal's head of research, who's also on this call. We spent a week meeting with China experts in think tanks and research institutes, also in Congress, and with a recent former NSC advisor. I spent another week in DC having more of these discussions in early March after APAC. And they themselves told us that the only consensus so far is that China's a challenge. What exactly are the challenges or problems? How should they be prioritized or addressed? There wasn't an agreement. So any pressure that Israel might confront would not be coming from a consensus on China. One effective way to address US concerns for Israel is to have a China plan that shows we've thought through the potential pitfalls, having identified opportunities with US concerns in mind, and having planned for a variety of eventualities with China, all with consideration for the US perspective. For example, we're aware of the tech and dual use issues and have put in place XYZ precautions, and that our oversight mechanism mentioned by Mike Herzog earlier will not only review investments, but also joint ventures and mergers and acquisitions and consortium participation in a wide range of areas such as energy, power, transportation, and infrastructure, both on a national and a local level. If we have solid, well-conceived answers to US questions or issues that show we've done our homework and we're prepared, it will be that much easier for the US to accept Israel's broadening relations with China. Thank you.
Thank you, Carice. The next speaker we'd like to comment, and again, please just a couple of minutes, is Professor Daniel Haber, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who is a specialist in international economics and especially East Asia economics at the University of Haifa. Professor Haber, please.
Shalom to everywhere. I'm speaking out of Paris, enjoying the springtime of Paris rather than the springtime of Israel, because my flight to Israel, which I was about to board, was cancelled. I have 3 comments to make on the impact of the virus on China, on America, and on the group of countries of which Israel is part, which I would call the third countries or the third parties. On China, there were 2 phases. The first phase finished last week. It was a very negative phase for China. They were blamed, they were humiliated. One of the big things that was not yet mentioned is the domestic impact. You remember these doctors, which were the first whistleblowers, Chinese doctors. They were blamed for spreading rumors. One of them died, and he became an instant hero in China through the very heavy, very active Chinese social media. And that went through to the Communist Party, through to the top to Xi Jinping. And that was very badly felt by the government of China. They felt the blow. It was really bad. We humiliated them. I'll give you 2 examples. One was already mentioned, the insistence of the US to call the virus not coronavirus, but the Chinese virus or Wuhan virus, or even the Kung flu. A small game, and this is very much resented by the Chinese. The other one was the blame which was put on individual Chinese in foreign countries. I saw it by myself in the streets of Paris, young Chinese being verbally assaulted, sometimes physically assaulted, just for being Chinese. I would summarize this period as anti-China racism, anti-speak. Very bad, and we know what we talk about when we talk about racism. This has changed last week. Now China is back to work. Manufacturing units are now producing everything that we need badly in Europe and in America, masks and ventilators, and they are using this capacity to sell to whoever they want. And so it's called the diplomacy of masks, diplomacy of ventilators. And well, they're right to do it. They are smart. They are playing a game. It's go. the game of Go. They know what are the weak points. They know how to sell. And this is called by our side propaganda. So we are back to insults. And overall, this is, of course, increasing the US-China confrontational mood. On the US, the impact is to make America today appear as extremely vulnerable and weak at the time when China is strong. This may change, this will change, but this is the case today. I'd like to focus on the third countries of which Israel is part. You have the Asian country, Japan, South Korea, Singapore. You have the Commonwealth countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the UK. You have Europe, including Switzerland, and you have Israel by itself. So all have a different way of resisting US pressure, but they all have several things in common. They're all market economy, they're all democracies, they're all on the side of America, of course, but they all resent the present confrontation. They don't like it. It's against their interest. They want to continue to do business with China, and Shalom Wald explained it very well. So this is very bad news for them. They also see China as an opportunity they cannot miss. And so therefore, their overall feeling is that on one way, you have America, their friends, which is distributing pressures, negative pressures. And on the other side, you have China, which is distributing doubts. The message of Chinese is very simple. Just look by yourself, see what's happening, judge by yourself, think long term. Who is going to win the high-tech battle, as Shalom mentioned? And think by yourself.
Thank you, Professor.
Of course, today, these countries are not saying anything, but they start thinking, and this is already a kind of battle which is won by China. Not the war, but the battle.
Thank you very much, Professor Haber. The last of our speakers that we would like to comment is Dan Katarivas. I believe I see him on the call. He heads the Division of Foreign Trade and International Relations at the Manufacturers Association of Israel, and also is the Director of International Relations at the Federation of Israeli Economic Organizations, and previously served as an Israeli diplomat in China. Mr. Katarivas?
Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon to where you are. I think that all of us have to be very humble, because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's the end of the crisis yet. And the crisis, I don't think that we can speak even about after Corona, because the Corona is still here and it is to stay probably for quite a while. Therefore, I think that the element of uncertainty are much bigger and larger than the element of certainty. And also the question of the short term, medium term, long term. And we have a lot of events coming which are not related to the Corona, or they are in a way. I mean, I'm just talking about the American election. And as we focus on America, obviously we know that America, I mean, the fear of the yellow peril is, let's say, the bipartisan, but I think that style also matters, okay? And the style of the present American administration is certainly not helping, and also the lack of leadership of the American administration is also not helping. And I'm not saying that everything can change, but they might be very interesting changes if we have a change of an administration in America. So I think that this is an element that we have to understand and to take into consideration, because it might affect also what we are discussing, the relation of America with the world, and the relation of America with the West, and the American relation with Israel. All that is connected in a way to the result of the next election. Not that everything is connected to one person, but in our case, I think that Trump is definitely a case by itself. Okay, so that's one element that we definitely have to take into consideration. I think that I also would like to speak about the what actually both Daniel Haber and Shalom Wald said. I mean, there is beside China, there is the other dimension of the other countries. And in effect, Israel definitely has to look for support, cooperation, not necessarily by looking only at the Chinese-American confrontation, because we are too small to decide by ourselves. But definitely, I think there are points of common interest that we have with both Europeans and Japan, for instance. I mean, it's very interesting, but Japan in the last 3-4 years has made a tremendous change in its relation to Israel. And I think Japan is only the third major economy in the world. So I think instead of looking at the attitude of Israel vis-a-vis the two contender, I mean, US and China, we should try to play a more global game and try to see where we have common interest, share interest with other partners, and vis-a-vis both America, by the way, and vis-a-vis China. I think we have a lot in common on the tech issue, i.e. the tech war, and we have a lot of common in that with the American and with the European, and we share the same, I would say, the same consideration concerning IP, concerning what are the next steps that we should take in order to not contain, but actually work together with China, but not losing our edge. So I think that those are areas where we can actually work, and there could be things interesting. And the more we try to forge common interest, not only with the American, which obviously, as Shlomo said, they are our major ally, but we have other interests also. Again, when we talk purely economically, I must say, US is very important economically, especially military. Don't forget the $3.8 billion that we're receiving every year. And I hope that the present crisis will not affect the possibility of the American to continue their military aid to Israel. Who knows? But the other major partners are the Europeans. The Europeans are still something like 40% of our import and 35% of our export. They are still our major market. So I think that we should try to really look not only on the American scene and the Chinese, but add the global dimension. And I want just to finalize by the last sentence I want to add. I think this is very, very important, is the presence of China in the Middle East. It was mentioned by Shalom Wald. I think that definitely this is a major change. And it's true that the presence of the Chinese in the Middle East is first and foremost economic, but I certainly believe that it will have a political effect. And then the question is, what is our interest with China in the region here, which, by the way, might not be exactly the same as the interest that we have with America. So that's another dimension. And at the end of the day, we live here in the Middle East, and we have to look at what's happening in our near neighborhood and who is mixing around. I haven't mentioned even the Russian, but that's another story. Thank you.
Thank you. That's for another webinar that would be equally as fascinating. Thank you to all our guest speakers, and of course to Shalom and to Mike. We'll now open the floor, I guess the digital floor, if you will, to questions or comments from our participants. So you can press on the raise hand function, and if you are on your phone and not on a computer, once again, you can press *9. So *9 if you're on your phone, or you can press to raise your hand, and we're happy to take questions or comments from the crowd. Okay, this one is unidentified, but we are happy to have somebody with a 202 area code on their phone.
Stu, this is Stu Eisenstadt.
Hi, Stu. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so first, I think this is a terrific idea to have this webinar. Both Michael and Shalom and our commentators were excellent, and this is really, I think, very innovative considering the circumstances we're in. I wanted to make a couple of points. First, on the CFIUS type process that Israel has begun to enunciate, that is, the committee like we have in the States to review foreign acquisitions of companies that have national security implications. It does seem to me that this is something, because as Michael mentioned, it's quite weak, it has no enforcement power. This is something in a balance of the administration that could be strengthened without at least immediate Chinese blowback. Second, on Shalom Wald's point about no historic anti-Semitism, that may be true, Shalom, but it's also true that they have yet to recognize, here we are in 2020, Judaism as an official religion. If one wants to pray, it has to be very quiet, and that's troubling. Third, reported just today in the Daily Beast, the White House and the President, following a conversation that he had with President Xi, in which it is reported he was excessively and aggressively flattering the President about his wonderful leadership on the pandemic, that Trump announced privately that he's going to drop any, and wants the State Department to drop any references to the Chinese virus and the Wuhan virus. Of course, the horse is out of the barn, but it is indicative of a somewhat toning down of the harshness of the rhetoric. And then last, a question. Is the Israeli government under pressure from both sides on using Huawei for 5G network, wireless network, as so many other countries are, including the UK, the UAE, and others? And if so, how do you expect that to come out? Because this is a fundamental issue with the administration, but also with China. And there are no Western companies that have the kind of technology, unfortunately, that Huawei does.
Thank you, Stu. Of course, Stu Eisenstadt, our co-chairman. Next, we'd like to call on Ramital, who is also with the Institute. Rami, would you like to ask a question? And then if Shalom and or Mike would like to answer Stu's question, we'll give you a few minutes to prepare your thoughts while Rami comments or asks his question.
Okay. I'm not an expert on China, but for the last 20 years, I've been visiting China at least once a year, sometimes more than that. Now, I have a few friends in China. One of them is a vice president of a huge bank. And he thinks, I talked to him last week, he thinks that one of the consequences of this crisis globally is that people all over the globe will see that the American confidence that America knows better than all other nations, that Americans can deal with problems better and maybe more wisely than other nations, will be shattered, and that other nations will not be so impressed with the American way of life and the American culture as they are now or as they were before this crisis. Now I would like to ask Shalom and Mike and maybe some other speakers, what is their attitude to this, this opinion? Thank you.
Thank you, Rami. Mike or Shalom, would you like to first address Stu's question, and then we'll try to address Rami's question, and then I see we have Carice would like to comment as well. So first, we'll address Stu's question, and then we'll address Rami's question. Mike, Shalom, either of you?
Yeah, I will address Stu's question. Unlike Europeans and others, I don't think we have that dilemma of whether or not to introduce Chinese G5 capabilities to Israel. We have our own infrastructure. We don't need the Chinese, unlike Europeans. So it's not a real dilemma for us. And in any case, I think this is one area where Israel can accommodate the United States. We have a big debate with them about infrastructure projects, and we'll continue to have that. And the fact is that we continue with the Haifa port project, notwithstanding US pressure. But when it comes to G5, things like that. I think given our own infrastructure, we can accommodate the US pressure on that. And I've been participating in quite a few dialogues with Europe and sharing the Israeli and European experience about navigating between the US and China. And that is, while we have many commonalities, that is one area where we have a different situation.
Thank you, Mike. Shalom, would you like to briefly comment as well?
Few words, yes. Regarding Stu's question whether Israel has been under pressure about Huawei, sure, the United States have warned Mr. Pompeo has warned Israel about Huawei, and as far as I know, there is Huawei 5G is not active in China. There are no Huawei investments. I hope I'm right. Maybe Dan Haber knows more about this, but that's what I know. Regarding this very old idea that China should recognize Judaism as an official religion. This is an internal Jewish debate. The Chabad, who have 11 centers in China, and the thousands of foreign Jews who live happily in China, celebrate Jewish holidays, do not need recognition. Now, there is a small group of people in Kaifeng who claim that they are descendants of Jews. They have been supported for 40 years by American Jewish visitors, by American Jewish money. They are presently in troubles. I don't see a real Jewish issue to try to argue with China about recognizing a group of a few hundred people as an official religion. China has 5 official religions. There are endless numbers of religions like a Russian Orthodox Church, which has 50,000 people, all sorts of native animistic religions, which are not recognized as official religions. It would be totally useless and counterproductive. It wouldn't work. So that is my personal reaction, but then I believe that people who supported the Kaifeng Jewish community will have another opinion, but that's what I can say at this moment.
Thank you. We'll take now, we'll go to Carice again, and then we have a comment or question from Ariel Berger, also with a signal, I believe. Carice?
Hi. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for the really interesting questions. Very quickly about Huawei, Mike, as far as we know, is 100% right. We don't need it, we don't want it, and we're not going to be using 5G from Huawei. On the other hand, Shalom, we do have an R&D center here. We've had it for years, and I don't know what kind of oversight that has had. In the early years, there wasn't. Now, perhaps that's changed. Stu, regarding your comment about the compliments that Trump gave to Xi Jinping, Trump has his own, style of strategy. He also, at the same time, while he gave all those compliments, he signed a law supporting Taiwan called the Taiwan Allies International Protection and Enhancement Initiative, Taipei, which is the capital of Taiwan. And it provides money, rewards for countries that strengthen and upgrade their relations with Taiwan. That is one of the most kick in the teeth actions that the Trump administration could make to China, because Taiwan is an existential issue for China. So we have to look at the broader picture of all the different actions that are taken. Some things get a lot less publicity than others. I just want to say about Dan Katarivas's comment on cooperating with other countries. I think he couldn't be more right. Israel's strength will definitely be in smart cooperation with third countries that are also allies or work with the US while maintaining strong relations with China. It's a very smart policy. Thanks.
Hi, yes, fantastic discussion, thank you. I wanted to make a comment which also related to what Dan mentioned about the uncertainty going on at the moment. If one looks at the recessions that have occurred in the last 30 years, they've normally coincided with a fundamental shift in the global landscape. That could be the 1990s in Europe, the dot-com in the 2000s, the rise of the emerging markets in 2008. And as well as coping with the global emergency for coronavirus, COVID-19, we're also seeing disruptions in the energy market, obviously the employment market. So 100% what Dan mentioned about this period of uncertainty. And I do wonder to myself if what we're going to see at the end of this is the end of the age of very heavily focused trade interdependence in globalization. And that might be looking at what we're looking at for the long-term future once the dust settles with this. I would imagine as well that within China, there is a lot of pressure going on with maintaining the current leadership, given what's gone on in China. And I 100% agree on the focus of technology in the years ahead. However, if, and this is an if, the scenario ahead is towards the death of globalization, perhaps in the West, we will be moving more towards a technocracy. And in that case, it may be more a focus on the data than the actual technology itself. Just relating to globalization, I'm from the UK, as you can hear, there's been a big outcry in the UK over 5G. And in Italy, it's been quite noticeable how the European Union didn't really come to Italy's help. So I think there might be major shifts of a very uncertain nature, which we can't yet know. And just a very final comment is that whatever the outcome is, there's clearly a gap in public health and globally in terms of preparedness. And in terms of positive relationships, what Israel has been doing with China just this week, coming out the Global Center with My Heritage and bringing out Chinese researchers, seems net positive without being too politically polarizing between the US and China. And I very much agree that there's great uncertainty ahead. We don't even know the end date.
Thank you very much. Any final comments or questions? Looking for hands being raised on the participant list. Okay, so we thank everyone for joining us. I also recommend once again that you download and read the paper. I read it yesterday, it's excellent. China's Rise, US Opposition and the Implications for Israel. It is available both in Hebrew and English on our website. And as we mentioned at the beginning, we will be hosting another in our series of webinars this Thursday, April 2nd, on the growth of the Haredi communities in the diaspora, expanding civic and political engagement, which will be led by our senior fellows, Dr. Shlomo Fisher, Dr. John Riskay, and Rabbi Dr. Dov Maimon. If you did not receive the invitation, please contact us and we will send you the Zoom link for that as well. Avinoam, would you like to say anything to
Dan,
conclude?
could we make some concluding remarks?
Please, go ahead.
Okay. So before we conclude this, I would like to address some of the points that came up here. First, Shalom said that China never regarded Israel as an enemy. I agree with that. But he also said that, or mentioned an Israeli attitude of regarding China in a negative or enemy way. And or I would not want to say that Israel does not regard China as an enemy. I think China is rather popular in opinion polls, but also in government circles. I have not heard anybody address China as an enemy. And so that is not the concern. Yes, we address US concerns, but we do not regard China as an enemy, never have. Secondly, there was a reference to China entering the Middle East big way. I think Shalom even used the word control of the Middle East. I think we should be much more reserved and nuanced about this. Yes, China is interested in the Middle East. It's on its map of One Belt, One Road. It is interested in economic and in the energy field, the sector, and so on. That's true. At the same time, please note that China refrains from entering war zones. It does not invest in war zones. It doesn't get engaged there. It doesn't want to enter Syria, Gaza, and I can give you more examples. It doesn't want to lead in any of these disputes. And even if China decides to go bigger into the Middle East, I'm not sure, between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which exact way is going to go, because already today China is importing more Saudi oil than Iranian oil. On other countries dealing with the tension between the US and China, I think, again, I would be very careful about assessing that the US will be isolated and all its allies will desert it and tilt more towards China. As I said, I've been part of a lot of dialogues with the Europeans, including decision makers in the last year. And what I hear from them is while they hate a lot of aspects in Trump's policies, at the same time, they say, and the US officially now say, the EU officially says that they have come to regard China, they traditionally regarded China as a trade opportunity. Now they regard it more and more as a risk in terms of national security. So I think we have to look at it in a more nuanced way again. But I would say, I agree with everybody who said that we should intensify the dialogue with other countries about, our experience and what to do in between the US and China. Finally, again, this is going to pose a bigger dilemma for us in the day after. I agree with Carice, so we need an all-government coordinated approach. We have to enhance our auditing mechanism, and I think that is the direction. Ultimately, it's very nice to complain, but we need policy. So instead of complain, let's focus on good policy.
Thank you, Mike. I've been being told that one of our guests named Avinoam, not our Avinoam, but one of our guests, Avinoam, would also like to speak. It's hard to see everybody at one time on the screen, so please, Avinoam.
It's not your fault. You have more than one Avinoam here.
Exactly.
Just a very briefly and short comment, and I follow what Mike Herzog just now mentioned. I think before starting the discussion, this dilemma about between the US and China, Israel between US and China, I think, and I follow what Carice said, I think at the beginning, that it's an internal question which Israel has to form such a strategy with regarding China. And I can suggest to see the scenario in about 5 or 10 years from now, and we have another superpower, China, really in our region. I mean, the Middle East, the Mediterranean, and Syria, by the way, reconstruction of Syria, potential cooperation between China and Russia on our borders. And we should look at it as it today. And we have to create an Israeli strategy, what we really want, what we can really afford. I mean, we have to keep our interest and our position regarding China in about 10 years are dependent what we are doing now, these days. I mean, I'm based in Haifa, by the way, and I was involved in this discussion about regarding Chinese port in Haifa, and we were blind. I mean, the feeling was that Israel is really blind regarding its strategy and policy with China. And I think that one of the greatest challenges is not to fall into this trap of soft power. And I don't see Israel is still ready to have the mechanism in order to keep our interest these days, challenging the future. And that's, I would say, might be also a good reason to have another debate, discussion, and to have Israeli strategy. It's much more important, at least the way I see it, it's much more important before going, between these two giants, the US and China. We should look at we have to have these scenarios about 5 years, 10 years, and to be ready for this future. That was my comment. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Carice, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, first of all, I want to commend JPPI again on raising this really critical topic. China's not discussed enough. in Israel. And I want to just raise the point, following on many different comments here, that one of our key problems is China is not understood in Israel. It's not in the media unless there's like a $400 million deal or some disaster between China and the US. We don't have general understanding that China does things in such a different way. So the usual policy considerations we might make with respect to US or Europe are not going to apply. We have to deal with China as China, which means you got to have an understanding of how they manage their affairs. Someone here mentioned it earlier. Soft power is not their usual way of doing things, but in fact, they do have a kind of insidious set of tools that we're not used to, that work in the same way as soft power. So I would say in general, this webinar is a great step towards getting a lot of people talking about this in a very central way. And I just want to finally say, Mike, thank you very much for your comment that we have to think about it today. Whatever the uncertainties are, if we don't start thinking and planning now, we're going to be very sorry on the day after. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Carice. Would anyone else like to say or add something? Okay, Shalom, would you like to add a concluding remark?
No, not really. There are no major differences between what Mike said and what I said. My worry is not that Israel is now anti-Chinese. My worry is that the Chinese could interpret us as hostile if we get more and more pressured by the United States to take measures which are anti-Chinese.
If we present it properly, that's not going to happen.
Thank you. Well, I see certainly a lot of helpful comments for Israeli leaders and policymakers to guide Israel policy on China and vis-a-vis the United States in this very tricky time. I see some actual Israeli policymakers among our list of participants today, and certainly a lot of people who have the ears of Israeli policymakers. So hopefully they're listening, and hopefully people will download this excellent report and read it. Thank you all for joining us. Avinoam from JPPI, would you like to conclude with anything?
And just to thank everybody for joining us, and looking forward to seeing you in our next webinars that will be of interest to some of you. And especially I want to thank Shalom for his wonderful piece, for Dennis, who had a conflict, couldn't be with us today, for his introduction, and no doubt for the insight contributed by Mike to the paper and to the discussion. Thank you so much.
And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.